Come on, get your cockles. Je voudrais. Yeah, what's that? Les petits manger. Breakfast, is it? Deux billets. 2 tickets, s'il vous plaît. Anytime, governor. Come again. Down and out in Paris and London. The podcast. Okay, so chapter 3. I'm not sure why I can't hear myself. But chapter 3 anyway. Here we go.
I lived in the Cocktail Quarter for about a year and a half. One day, in summer, I found that I had just 450 francs left, and beyond this nothing but 36 francs a week, which I earned by giving English lessons. Hitherto I had not thought about the future, but I now realized that I must do something at once. I decided to start looking for a job, and, very luckily as it turned out, I took the precaution of paying 200 francs for a month's rent in advance.
It's just worth mentioning perspective, I think, at this point. This is written squarely in the past tense, and it is recounting, and it is a piece of recount writing, his travels in Paris and London. So worth comparing that as well to Funder's style, looking at use of tense. But like Funder, he uses the start of each chapter discourse markers. In this case, it gives us a sense of time and place. He lived in the Cocktail Quarter for about a year and a half. So we have that chronology, which is so vital to a piece of autobiographical travel writing, really, isn't it? And so we need to give that sense of time and place, and we have that here.
With the other 250 francs, besides the English lessons, I could live a month, and in a month I should probably find work. I aimed at becoming a guide to one of the tourist companies, or perhaps an interpreter. However, a piece of bad luck prevented this.
So unlike with Stasiland, we have possibly more narrative devices here, and this clearly is withholding information. So this is a bit of a cliffhanger. A piece of bad luck prevented this. What is that bad luck? Well, let's find out. Let's read the next bit. That doesn't happen quite so much in Stasiland. She relies on our own curiosities to sort of match hers. Now, that's partly because she's writing in a more modern style, a more contemporary style, whereas this is dated. So there's a bit of that. But I think also Orwell's perhaps more... I know we talked before about Funder using more fictional styles of writing, but perhaps Orwell is more naturally a writer of fiction, and so he's naturally wanting to engage the reader in that way and provide those narrative hooks that sort of thing does.
One day there turned up at the hotel a young Italian who called himself a compositor. He was rather an ambiguous person, for he wore side whiskers, which are the mark either of an Apache or an intellectual, and nobody was quite certain in which class to put him. Madame F. did not like the look of him, and made him pay a week's rent in advance. The Italian paid the rent and stayed 6 nights at the hotel. During this time he managed to prepare some duplicate keys, and on the last night he robbed a dozen rooms, including mine. Luckily he did not find the money that was in my pockets, so I was not left penniless. I was left with just 47 francs, that is, 7 and 10 pence. This put an end to my plans of looking for work. I had now got to live at the rate of about 6 francs a day, and from the start it was too difficult to leave much thought for anything else. It was now that my experiences of poverty began, for 6 francs a day, if not actual poverty, is on the fringe of it. 6 francs is a shilling, and you can live on a shilling a day in Paris if you know how, but it is a complicated business. It is altogether curious, your first contact with poverty. You have thought so much about poverty. It is the thing you have feared all your life, the thing you knew would happen to you sooner or later. And it is all so utterly and prosaically different. You thought it would be quite simple. It is extraordinarily complicated.
So here we have a fair few rhetorical features in this little paragraph here, or just up to this point in the paragraph. So it's altogether curious, your first contact with poverty. You've thought so much about poverty. So there's epistrophe there to place that word poverty. Now, we met that before in the last chapter. I think it was the last chapter, yeah. Yes, it was. And so obviously whenever he comes across that theme of poverty, he wants to give it more gravity, more weight, and to spotlight it a little bit. So there's often rhetorical features around that word. So do look out when you see the word poverty. It's often rich pickings for some techniques around that. And we've got that there. There's also anaphora with, it is the thing you feared all your life, the thing you knew would happen to you sooner or later. So that reference to the thing, which is also deixis, D-E-I-X-I-S, because it's labelling something, it's calling it the thing, which sort of, I don't know, it kind of makes it seem more intimidating because it's something which is a sort of thing to be frightened. It's almost, it's so vague that it makes it more worrying, I suppose. And then you've got, you thought it would be quite simple. It is extraordinarily complicated. So you've got that parallelism there, and the dichotomy and the juxtaposition of those two things. You thought it would be quite simple. It is extraordinarily complicated. So that juxtaposition of those two oxymorons, really. You thought it would be terrible. It is merely squalid and boring. So this whole thing is littered with parallelisms. You thought it would be. You thought it would be. That's anaphora, and then we get this sort of these semicolons to deliver the actual punchline. In fact, it's almost, I say this a lot of nights, it's almost that it functions as antipophora, which is A-N-T-H-Y, anthy, P-O-P-H-O-R-A, antipophora. And it's when you set up a question and then answer it yourself. And it's sort of saying, you thought it would be quite simple, did you? Well, it's extraordinarily complicated. So it's setting up a statement or a question and then answering it, which is antipophora. So he does that a couple of times there. You thought it would be terrible. It is merely squalid and boring. Yeah, and that's it. So there's a few things happening in that paragraph there around the theme of poverty, which is significant because the whole book is about poverty and living in poverty.
You thought it would be terrible. It is merely squalid and boring. It is the peculiar lowness of poverty that you discover first, the shifts that it puts you to, the complicated meanness, the crust wiping. You discover, for instance, the secrecy attaching to poverty. At a sudden stroke, you have been reduced to an income of 6 francs a day. But of course you dare not admit it. You've got to pretend that you are living quite as usual. From the start it tangles you in a net of lies, and even with the lies you can hardly manage it. You stop sending clothes to the laundry, and the laundress catches you in the street and asks you why. You mumble something, and she, thinking you are sending the clothes elsewhere, is your enemy for life.
Now, here we have the shift to the present tense, telling us what we do. You discover, for instance, the secrecy attaching to poverty. A sudden stroke, you have been reduced to an income of 6 francs a day. You dare not admit it. You've got to pretend that you're living quite as usual. And then it talks about the tobacconist keeps asking you why you've cut down your smoking. This is happening now. So what Orwell's doing, of course, is he's putting us in that position, putting us in that situation right now, as if we're living that life, that poverty-stricken life, and that net of lies that he talks about, that metaphor of net of lies. By putting it in the present tense, it makes it much more real and hard-hitting, and it lets the reader imagine what that must be like.
The tobacconist keeps asking why you have cut down your smoking. There are letters you want to answer and cannot because stamps are too expensive. And then there are your meals. Meals are the worst difficulty of all. Every day at mealtimes you go out ostensibly to a restaurant and loaf an hour in the Luxembourg Gardens, watching the pigeons. Afterwards you smuggle your food home in your pockets. Your food is bread and margarine, or bread and wine, and even the nature of the food is governed by lies. You have to buy rye bread instead of household bread because the rye loaves, though dearer, are round and can be smuggled in your pockets. This wastes you 1 franc a day. Sometimes, to keep up appearances, you have to spend 60 centimes on a drink and go correspondingly short of food. Your linen gets filthy, and you run out of soap and razor blades. Your hair wants cutting, and you try to cut it yourself with such fearful results that you have to go to the barber after all and spend the equivalent of a day's food. All day you are telling lies, and expensive lies.
Here we've got the anaphora of your linen gets filthy, your hair wants cutting, you have to buy rye bread. So there's this parallelism throughout here, and it's direct address to the reader. You have to, you're this, you're that. And it's sort of presented as an asyndetic list as well of things that lifestyle changes that have to happen. So he combines these asyndetic lists, or rather he combines the anaphora within an asyndetic list, and then finishes up with the epistrophe of all day you're telling lies and expensive lies. So that's epistrophe, ending with that word lies again there, just to really emphasize the difficulty of living in that lifestyle.
You discover the extreme precariousness of your 6 francs a day. Mean disasters happen and rob you of food. You've spent your last 80 centimes on a half-litre of milk and are boiling it over the spirit lamp. While it boils, a bug runs down your forearm. You give the bug a flick with your nail, and it falls, plop, straight into the milk. There is nothing for it but to throw the milk away and go foodless.
Would you not just fish the bug out and drink it anyway? I'm not sure. I think if I was that hungry and that poor, I think I'd have to just drink the milk anyway. Anyway, onomatopoeia with the word plop. What a great onomatopoeia word. Probably the best. Plop. Again, combined with the present tense, it's putting us in that situation. There's direct address, the present tense, and the onomatopoeia is working together to give us a sense that this is happening to us right now, and we've been immersed in this situation.
You go to the baker's to buy a pound of bread, and you wait while the girl cuts a pound for another customer. She is clumsy and cuts more than a pound. "Pardon, monsieur," she says. "I suppose you don't mind paying 2 sous extra?" Bread is a franc a pound, and you have exactly a franc. When you think that you too might be asked to pay 2 sous extra, and would have to confess that you could not, you bolt in panic. It is hours before you dare venture into a baker's shop again. You go to the greengrocer's to spend a franc on a kilogram of potatoes, but one of the pieces that make up the franc is a Belgian piece, and the shopman refuses it. You slink out of the shop and can never go there again. You have strayed into a respectable quarter, and you see a prosperous friend coming. To avoid him, you dodge into the nearest cafe. Once in the cafe, you must buy something, so you spend your last 50 centimes on a glass of black coffee with a dead fly in it. One could multiply these disasters by the 100. They are part of the process of being hard up. You discover what it is like to be hungry. With bread and margarine in your belly, you go out and look into the shop windows. Everywhere there is food insulting you in huge, wasteful piles. Whole dead pigs, baskets of hot loaves, great yellow blocks of butter, strings of sausages, mountains of potatoes, vast Gruyere cheeses like grindstones.
So there we've got the asyndetic list of all the food, but it's personified as insulting you. So the food insulting you in huge, wasteful piles. So worth marking the personification, and then of course the asyndetic list, and it's sort of described quite vividly, isn't it? So a whole dead pig sounds horrible. Baskets of hot loaves, great yellow blocks of butter, strings of sausages, mountains of potatoes. So that it's just described quite figuratively: strings of sausages, mountains of potatoes, vast Gruyere cheeses like grindstones. Almost like it's sort of quite an intimidating amount of food, which of course it is, because when you can't afford it, it makes things worse.
A snivelling self-pity comes over you at the sight of so much food. You plan to grab a loaf and run, swallowing it before they catch you, and you refrain from pure funk.
That's a very Victorian word, is funk, meaning cowardice. Not that he refrains from stealing bread because he's listening to funk music, but because ultimately he's too frightened of getting caught and Well, we've all seen Les Mis, haven't we? You know, I mean, if you steal a loaf of bread, we all know what happens then.
You discover the boredom which is inseparable from poverty. The times when you have nothing to do, and being underfed can interest yourself in nothing. For half a day at a time you lie on your bed, feeling like the jeune squelette in Baudelaire's poem.
This is an exophoric reference, of course, to Baudelaire's poem. It's the poem Spleen by Baudelaire, and the jeune squelette is the young skeleton. It translates to, and it's the character in the poem. So it's a graphic reference to being skinny and bony with no food, no nourishment, like the debauched character in Baudelaire's poem. So a fitting reference, given that it's a French poet. So a fitting exophoric reference to make.
Only food could rouse you. You discover that a man who has gone even a week on bread and margarine is not a man any longer, only a belly with a few accessory organs.
Now that's something you could use, isn't it? There's sort of a dehumanising there of person, and that's something which you could certainly compare with Funder. I think what's coming across here, and what I'm sure you're already thinking, is that descriptions of character and characterization and caricaturing of people is something which you'll be able to look at in both very, very easily. And it should certainly, I would recommend, be a big part of what you're comparing, along with narrative perspective as well. But that will come to that when we get to the end of this book and look at the overarching perspective that's used in both texts. So, only a belly with a few accessory organs is obviously hyperbole, and it's exaggerated and heightened for effect. But it's sort of dehumanizing and ridiculous, the idea that when you've just had bread and margarine for a week, you become nothing more than just desperate for food, which is understandable. But it's described in a very vivid way, and it's obviously metaphorical and hyperbolic.
This, one could describe it further, but it is all in the same style, is life on 6 francs a day. Thousands of people in Paris live it, struggling artists and students, prostitutes when their luck is out of work people of all kinds. It is the suburbs, as it were, of poverty.
So that metaphor then, the suburbs of poverty, taking the idea of a noun or an abstract noun in a way, isn't it, poverty? Yeah. And using the metaphor suburbs to sort of figuratively describe poverty as something more relatable, as something which is larger than what it is, something which actually is a physical location, something with suburbs, something with a centre and suburbs, and he feels like he's on the suburbs, the fringe. He uses that word fringe of poverty. So this is a key theme for this book, poverty, and we knew that. And so whenever we find this, we get rhetorical features, but we also get lots of figurative techniques too. Did I say figurative then? I can't. No, yeah, rhetorical features and figurative techniques. So we're looking out for both. So whenever you see that word, it's a really important signpost to be looking out for where things are around that tend to be quite useful to us.
I continued in this style for about 3 weeks. The 47 francs were soon gone, and I had to do what I could on 36 francs a week from the English lessons. Being inexperienced, I handled the money badly, and sometimes I was a day without food. When this happened, I used to sell a few of my clothes, smuggling them out of the hotel in small packets and taking them to a second-hand shop in the Rue de la Montagne, Sainte-Geneviève. The shopman was a red-haired Jew, an extraordinarily disagreeable man who used to fall into furious rages at the sight of a client. From his manner, one could have supposed that we had done him some injury by coming to him. "Merde!" he used to shout. "You here again? What do you think this is, a soup kitchen?" And he paid incredibly low prices. For a hat, which I had bought for 25 shillings and scarcely worn, he gave me 5 francs. For a good pair of shoes, 5 francs. For shirts, a franc each. He always preferred to exchange rather than buy, and he had a trick of thrusting some useless article into one's hand and then pretending that one had accepted it. Once I saw him take a good overcoat from an old woman, put 2 white billiard balls in her hand, and then push her rapidly out of the shop before she could protest. would have been a pleasure to flatten the Jew's nose, if only one could have afforded it. These 3 weeks were squalid and uncomfortable, and evidently there was worse coming, for my rent would be due before long. Nevertheless, things were not a quarter as bad as I had expected. For when you are approaching poverty, you make one discovery which outweighs some of the others. You discover boredom and mean complications and the beginnings of hunger, but you also discover the great redeeming feature of poverty, the fact that it annihilates the future. Within certain limits, it is actually true that the less money you have, the less you worry. When you have 100 francs in the world, you are liable to the most craven panics. When you have only 3 francs, you are quite indifferent, for 3 francs will feed you till tomorrow, and you cannot think further than that. You are bored, but you are not afraid. You think vaguely, I shall be starving in a day or two, shocking, isn't it? And then the mind wanders to other topics. A bread and margarine diet does, to some extent, provide its own anodyne. And there is another feeling that is a great consolation in poverty. I believe everyone who has been hard up has experienced it. It is a feeling of relief, almost of pleasure, at knowing yourself at last genuinely down and out. You have talked so often of going to the dogs, and well, here are the dogs, and you have reached them, and you can stand it. It takes off a lot of anxiety.
So just to round up chapter 3 then, just that last little paragraph, we get Orwell's own thoughts. I believe everyone who has been hard up has experienced it. It is a feeling of relief, almost of pleasure, at knowing yourself at last genuinely down and out. And there we've got that reference to the title as well. So I suppose you could even think that as being an anaphoric reference back to the title of the book itself. And it works in that way. And just the phrase, I believe, that's something you would never find in Funda. She doesn't give such direct, subjective thoughts. So it's interesting how Orwell, at some points, when it comes to characters, he doesn't judge as harshly or as clearly and as biasedly, as in such a biased way, as Funda does. And yet, at the same time, she tends to keep back her own thoughts on sort of larger politics. She tends to offer that up for us to judge, really. So that's interesting, the way that she presents the politics quite objectively, whereas he presents poverty quite subjectively. So that's a point that you might want to jot down or be thinking about as you progress further with this. And that's it for chapter 3. See you again in chapter 4.